Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, 'One does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, 'He will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone.'" Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, 'Do not put the Lord your God to the test.'" Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, 'Worship the Lord your God and serve only him.'" Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him.
The thing that jumped out at me was first Jesus had to be very tired before, the temptations came when he was weak. He was tired and hungry and probably wanting for things. And that's when the temptations come. I see it as sort of a metaphor for a lot of real life, when opportunities come, when you're desperate for them, and then, but there's a catch, and are you willing to betray your morals to take advantage of that situation? I remember I really like watching religious movies, and one of them that I like is The Greatest Story Ever Told, starring Max von Sydow. And they have the temptation in the wilderness scene, and the devil is played by Donald Pleasance. And he's just a guy in a robe. He's not a big horned beast. He's just sat in the desert, just eaten by a fire. And he just very casually is tempting Christ, saying, "Why don't you just make those stones into bread?" And it's a very subtle and I often feel that's how temptation comes to me, is it's kind of, it's not a big deal, just do these little things, and it's probably for the best anyway. It's just it's very hard to fight a little voice like that. And so I saw a lot of realism in that passage, that things come to you when you're weak. And I've had friends that have been through some rough times recently, and I imagine they've been tempted by a few things. And temptation comes to you in a way that often seems quite appealing. For example, I don't drink. I'm not tempted by alcohol because it doesn't do anything for me. So you couldn't tempt me with a drink. But there are other things where I'd go, actually, you know what? That might actually be quite fun. So it's just seeing how the devil's just kind of needling it and trying to find his weak point. What's so incredible, of course, is that he doesn't get through. I'm not sure I'd stand up to quite as much temptation as that. But yeah, I got quite a bit out of that passage.
Wonderful.
It's all about testing God, I think. And it's the Son of God. But it's the Son of God in human form. So it's the human side of God that's been tested. And it's quite an interesting theory. It's quite confusing for me because it's almost God testing God, So we're sort of looking at it on the human side. And it's quite interesting because we all hear these voices and we're all put in these situations regularly, I think. I mean, not literally, we wouldn't, be able to turn bread into stone. But I think temptation is a big part of our faith, and it's a big part to take us away from parts of our faith. So, for instance, on the last chapter there's a very detailed part about being a lord of the world, and at the moment we see certain politicians in our world that are being tempted by that. We all know who they are, all over the world, and if only they worship the Lord our God, instead of going down that route, you can immediately see how the world would be a lot better place. So you can take that, showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor, and he said to him, all of these I will give to you, and if you fall down and worship me. Well, you can imagine those very, very senior leaders of the world that would probably want to do that and take over the world. So they've almost got that temptation, and for some of them they've tried to do it, actually tried to do it. And if you look at that, worship the Lord your God and serve only him, imagine what the world would be like if that came to be. So I see that as a very, very relevant piece of, I know it's tempting Jesus, but all these things are tempting Jesus in his human form. I don't think they're tempting Jesus in his divine form, because he would be immune, totally immune. But while he's been in the wilderness for 40 days, he's very, very hungry. He's came down to earth to be with us, to be a human. He is being tempted as a human, and I think that's why we can take that as an example almost for us to follow. Because that's his human side that's being tempted. His divine side couldn't possibly be tempted.
I really like that idea of you talking about his humanity, which is deeply relatable for us. So that sense that we have a God who knows us. We have a God who is with us. He knows our joys, our pain, our suffering, and our doubts and struggles. That's so real. And that comes out in this a reading that we've just read about Jesus being tempted by the devil. And you made the point that, there's no point, you won't be tempted with anything that, your desires or passions don't hold. My daughter said to me at the beginning of Lent, because we're in Lent now, she said, I'm going to give up desserts and sweets and cakes and things like that. And I said, well, daughter, let me pray for you for strength through that. And she goes to school, comes back and said, they made the most amazing desserts today.
No, really? Yeah.
But she said she was strong. But then that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah.
The moment you resolve to a life of discipline, of prayer, and of generosity and almsgiving, then the temptations come. But then we need to have a resolve like Jesus. Why? I was particularly struck by verse 11. And this was after all the, you do this and do this if you're this, if you're that. And the verse 11 says, then the devil left him.
Yeah.
So he's thrown all his cards. He's done.
Yeah.
Then the devil left him. That's the first bit. And then the second part says, and suddenly. So there is a glory. God's love for us is not an empty love that leads nowhere. It leads to the ultimate life with him, which is where we find our peace, our joy, and fulfillment in God. And suddenly, angels came and waited on him. So in our struggles and in the temptations that we all face, even as priests, the temptations we all face, we must remember that at the end of it, we're not just doing it as an empty process, but in the end, angels came and waited on him. God has a plan for each and every one of us. And our trials are only there to help us deepen our faith, strengthen us in the faith, so that we can move to the next level with God. Because our journey with God is a relational journey, really. We're relating with God. And in any relationship, you can trust better when you've been through stuff.
Yeah. And the other thing with saying following God, which is also how it ends, there's a lot of passages like that, follow God above all else.
Yeah.
And it threw me off for a long time because I was imagining God as a person, and it's almost jealous, like follow me and not those other people. But it's, and then I heard this explanation, which is, well, God is also the personification of goodness itself. Like everything that's good is summed up in that being. So it's also saying follow goodness above everything else. That's the highest goal, is that you should, in whatever you're doing, no matter how weak and starving you are, to follow goodness above everything else, all the other things that you could aim at. Pleasure, anger, self-destruction. Aim for goodness above all of that, and that will guide you through. And of course, that's personified in God.
In God, absolutely.
But that's how I was able to understand that a bit more.
But
I was with somebody a few weeks ago, and we were in a position to help this chap that had flattened his battery on his car. And he was stuck. He was really stuck. And I was with this other guy, and I said, oh, let's help him out. And they said, oh no, I can't be bothered doing that. And of course, I suppose there's two ways of looking at it. There's doing well for others, and it's also the way you're brought up automatically. The way you're brought up says, no, that's completely wrong. You've got to help people. So I helped this guy. I got a little extension lead and a charger and charged his battery up. And I said to the other chap I said, so you wouldn't have helped him? No, nothing in it for me. I wouldn't have helped him. Oh, okay. Anyway, so we got him going, and he went, and off he went. I said, do you not feel better for, helping out and getting him going? He said, nah, it does nothing for me. And when I did that little act, as very often the case is when you do little acts like that, you get that warm feeling of you've done the right thing and it feels good. He didn't have any feelings. He was cold. It was a cold life. And I sometimes think that when you are with God and you do things in alignment with Jesus' teaching and with God's will, and you help other people, you do things the right way, and you get that really, really warm glow. And sometimes when I'm with God, or just knowing that God's with me, I feel like I'm walking on air. You must have felt that sometimes.
No, absolutely.
And the thing in this passage, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. That's how I feel when you're walking on air.
That's it.
That's how it's only a little thing helping that guy out, but his car started and off he went, and his family went on the way, and they weren't stuck there. And there's a little warm glow in your heart that you've done God's work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some people might be brought up to just say, oh, it's the right thing to do, which it is. But it's also something that God would have you do.
Absolutely.
So I can see that right at the end. Angels came and waited on him.